welcome back to the Insights podcast by the UNSW Law Society. We're your hosts for this episode, Adrika and Will.
Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people, the traditional custodians of the land on which this podcast is recorded, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging.
And today, we are joined by Sparke Helmore.
So in this episode, we'll be talking with two very special guests who are part of the government public and regulatory team. Sparke Helmore is one of the largest providers of legal services to the Commonwealth Government. The firm's government, public, and regulatory team, comprising 110 lawyers nationally, advises extensively on a broad range of legislative schemes in support of decision-making processes. Their expertise covers statutory interpretation, legislative compliance, including under privacy and FOI law, and the public interest disclosure scheme, and a broad range of regulatory matters, including enforcement matters. The majority of the lawyers within the team are solicitor advocates who represent Commonwealth departments and agencies in more than 5,000 merits and judicial review matters each year, and are trusted with some of the most complex, sensitive, and high-profile appellate matters.
So our first guest is Karwan Eskerie. Karwan is a partner and public regulatory law specialist within Sparke Helmore's government and public and regulatory team. He has extensive experience in advising Commonwealth government clients on complex administrative and regulatory processes and decision-making, risk management, statutory interpretation, legislative development, and litigation. His experience includes acting as a legal advisor on major reform projects and conducting legal reviews of legislative and regulatory frameworks, as well as drafting primary and secondary legislation, instructional material, and policy documents. Drawing upon his experience as a former barrister, Karwan regularly appears as an advocate on behalf of Commonwealth clients in complex litigation matters. Karwan began his legal career in New Zealand, where he worked in the local government team of a top-tier firm in Auckland, and subsequently practiced as a solicitor in leading government practices in England before transferring to the bar. He has a BCL with distinction from the University of Oxford and was named Partner of the Year at the 2017 Lawyers Weekly Australian Law Awards, and he also sits on the board of Sparke Helmore.
We'll also be joined today by Katherine Evans. Katherine is an experienced administrative lawyer and solicitor advocate who regularly appears for Commonwealth agencies in complex judicial review proceedings before the Federal Court of Australia and the Federal Circuit and Family Court of Australia. She is also the solicitor on record and instructs counsel in matters before the full court of the Federal Court and the High Court of Australia. In addition to a litigation practice, Katherine regularly advises Commonwealth agencies on issues of statutory interpretation, regulatory processes, litigation strategy, and decision-making.
So now that we know about your amazing careers, it's also important to get to know you both as individuals. So we have a few questions that we like to ask our guests at the very start, and the first one I think is quite important, given that we're right in the heart of the city. I would love to know, what is your go-to coffee spot around here?
I don't think either of us like to venture very far, but right behind this building where Sparke Helmore is in the laneway is a coffee shop called Label.
Okay.
Not spelt Label, but that is really good, and I'm trying my best to minimise my caffeine intake, and they actually do a really, really, really good hot chocolate. So I do have coffee, but their hot chocolate slaps.
So for me, this becomes really tricky because I only have one caffeinated drink a day, and so I have to find the best decaf coffee. So for me, it's Porterfilter, which is in this MLC building at level 6, and that's because they have coffee from 7 Miles Roasters, who are my local roasters on Northern Beaches, and they have the best decaffeinated coffee.
Oh, I also drink decaf, so I think I'm going to have to give that a go later on today. Okay, and a bit more about, I guess, yourself, but also in your practice. If you had to swap practice areas within Sparke Helmore for just a week, where would you like to go? I'll start with Karwan.
I would love to go to our ICT procurement team in Canberra, and that's because they spend their days negotiating with the likes of Google and Amazon and the like on the latest procurement of tech for government.
Wow, that does sound quite interesting. And?
My answer's a bit more superficial. We recently opened a CANS office at Sparke Helmore, and they have a planning and local planning team, and so I would want to be in that team also just to go to Cairns for the week.
I was actually in Cairns just last week.
Oh, well, there you go.
It's a very lovely place. It is very warm there at the moment.
There you go.
I absolutely understand.
So last question, if you guys had to do a TED Talk on a particular topic area of interest, what would you guys present on?
This was a really tricky question for us to answer, but the one that came to mind, because you guys are here from UNSW, was my one would be kind of like advocating for a universal fundamentals course at university for everyone in every course everywhere. A discussion I was having with the junior lawyer in our team the other day was just about like the basics of writing, and I think maybe you only do that if you are an English lit major in like an arts degree, but I would have massively benefited from just a 1 semester course on how to write a really good email. It would have been really practical. So that's my whole TED talk, I guess.
I'd definitely enroll, yeah.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear it.
Mine would probably be a bit less interesting, but the one I would do it on is perspective. I often reflect on my own perspective on things, and I think as a whole, we tend to keep our own perspectives in check less than we should. And we also probably need to appreciate other people's perspectives more and more deeply than we do as a whole. And I think we'd all have happier, fuller lives if we were better at that.
Wow, I've got now 2 TED Talks that I need to go to. And that's very insightful. Thank you, Karwan.
For our students who may be hearing about this practice area for the first time, how would you kind of describe your role fits within Sparke's government, public and regulatory team?
So we have a very large public and regulatory team. We are the largest private provider of public law services to the Commonwealth Government, and so that means our teams spread across the country, serving various Commonwealth agencies. And so by necessity, that means we sit within a very large team. And so within our own immediate team, there are 3 partners, a number of very senior people such as Katherine, who's a special counsel in the team, and then a large number of lawyers and support staff. And so we work very collaboratively across both the immediate team but also the wider practice group. And we have a team in Canberra that we work very closely with as well. It's difficult to isolate one's individual role within such a setting, but that's sort of in a nutshell the environment in which we operate.
I think Karwan's underselling his role a little in all of that. I would call him our fearless leader. My role, like Karwan said, I'm a special counsel in our team. Day to day, what those very senior roles look like is doing advocacy at quite a high level. Just talk myself up a little bit, but we do, like you guys said in the intro, have a large solicitor advocacy practice, which means we do run hearings to final hearings ourselves as advocates a lot, which is unusual. So being a very senior lawyer in our team involves a lot of complex advocacy. It also involves a lot of mentoring, training of our lawyers. We call it knowledge management. There's a big knowledge management practice at this firm, ensuring that everyone's on the same page and given all the resources and training and systems to succeed.
Well, speaking about succeeding as a lawyer, you're working in really high level and complex matters, obviously with the government. What do you think are some specific skills that lawyers need to succeed in this area that you've found either in your own practice or that you've observed in others?
In answering that question, I'll focus on our area, which is public law, but probably the answer applies more generally to any area of law. And I think it has to begin with a genuine intellectual interest in the area of law that you're practicing in. And you really need to have that sort of deep engagement with the area of law, because that's what will sustain you and that's what will make sure you do your best in that particular area. And so one of the things we often get when we interview people is they come and say, I'd like to work with government. And we always say, well, that's not enough of an interest. You need to actually have an interest in the subject matter, in the public law space. And so if you enjoyed admin law at uni, if you have a genuine interest in administrative and public law, then that's when you should be looking at getting into this area. And I think that would apply across the board to any area that you work in. And I would say that is fundamental, and that's not so much a skill, but an interest, and then cultivating that interest and making sure that you do your best in it becomes the game.
I completely wholeheartedly agree with what Karwan said, although I would caveat to all the law students out there that when I did administrative law at university, I did not think I would become an administrative lawyer. It's not necessarily indicative of what public law is, the way it's taught so theoretically at university. So it is finding that interest and finding out about it, no matter what area of law, whether it's employment or family law or whatever you want to do, is definitely essential. But when you come to a practice like ours that does have such a large litigation practice, we have an advisory and litigation aspects to our practice, but I do a lot of litigation, and for me, I think the people who enjoy it the most and succeed are the people who do like that kind of pressure of litigation. It's fast-paced, it involves a lot of on-the-spot problem solving. People who enjoy public speaking. I always enjoyed debating at high school, and I did all the things at university, even like the negotiation competition and all the way mooting, all those kind of things. So I think if you want to be a litigator, an interest in those things and a comfort with those things certainly helps. And then it's all the things like any lawyer, attention to detail, time management, all those kind of things that, of course, a big part of our practice as well.
And practicing being grounded, that I would say is the core thing, because in any busy legal practice, staying in control of your temperament and remaining grounded in the way you think through issues is fundamental to your craft as a lawyer. And the sooner you get into the habit of really keeping yourself grounded, because it is a skill that you develop, and it is something that can be taught and that can be learned, but it requires a lot of conscious practice. And that, I would say, is at the heart of succeeding in any busy legal practice.
Definitely, yeah. Those were some really insightful points. I think like having an enjoyment of the subject matter is definitely key. And as you mentioned as well, people can develop interests as they go along in uni. And so kind of like following on from that, the next question, you mentioned you work quite closely with a lot of government clients. Obviously, Sparke's quite known for that provision of services to governments as well. So how do you find collaboration with those government clients kind of looks like in practice?
I think it's fair to say that I know others in the team find this one of the most rewarding elements of our practice, because the way you operate when you have government as your client, they are government here to stay, and you build relationships with them over many, many years. Sparks has been one of the leading providers of government services for more than 2 decades. And so we would have relationships with each of the organizations, each of the agencies we work with that span many, many years. And so what that means is that your approach to the way you collaborate with your clients is not transactional. It's based on a view of the long game, the long strategy in terms of your client's best interests, their priorities and objectives, and then you align yourself with that. You make sure you understand what those priorities are, and that you can best serve in your role as their lawyer. It is also one of the aspects of working with government that is also very rewarding is government is not operating for profit. It is operating with a mission that is rooted in its democratic mandate, and so it is trying to achieve some goals for the community. It acts as a model litigant. It is mindful of its obligations to the public and to uphold the public interest and to be fair. And those are qualities that come through in every aspect of our interactions with our clients and the way we then conduct ourselves when we represent the government. And so it's a very rich collaborative relationship, and it's rooted in very deep values that I think make working with government clients, for me at least, a particularly fulfilling experience.
And going off that, Kat, is there anything about your daily work, whether it's in collaboration with government, that might surprise our listeners that may or may not know much about this area?
Yeah, I think the main one I've already alluded to is actually the sheer volume of advocacy we do. I think, when I was at university especially, I had this perception that the people who went to court and ran a hearing were always barristers and they had robes. We do get to wear robes sometimes in certain states when you're in the federal jurisdiction, which is very fun to play dress up. But the amount of solicitor advocacy that's done in government, I've had, over the years instructing counsel in court who didn't do this as a job at a law firm before they went to the bar say to me, I can't believe that this exists and that you've probably been to more final hearings than I have. And they're super experienced, impressive people, but the opportunities that you get to actually go to court and run a hearing yourself as a solicitor, it's really unusual for a litigation team. If you're doing commercial litigation, my understanding at least is if you're doing commercial litigation, you certainly wouldn't have those opportunities. There's probably a more jovial answer to this question too, which is that even if you work in a practice that has a large litigation component, that doesn't mean you work till midnight. It's certainly not been a theme of my experience or practice as a government lawyer, public lawyer for government. There are times where it can be really full on if you're doing litigation, but certainly not the norm. It's not the norm to be in an office after 9-10 p.m. at night. I think it's a perception people have about law generally, but certainly litigation practices, that's just not true.
I think that's very reassuring to hear.
It's good news.
It is. And I think you're right that the level of advocacy is quite unique for in this area of law compared to others. So that is some great experience for solicitors to get under their belt.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, we're all reassured as law students to hear that it's not long hours like that. So thank you for that. In terms of kind of moving on from that as well, I know you mentioned that you did a bit of mooting and Karwan, you mentioned like the kind of work that you do with government clients often is a very deep, rich connection as well. So we're wondering, is there a type of case that you guys particularly enjoy working on? And conversely, to give our students the full spectrum, is there any types of cases or work that you find maybe a little bit less engaging?
Yeah, we had a big debate about this earlier between us.
Because the answer is we love everything we do.
That's right.
We find everything engaging. That's kind of the problem we have.
Which is why we phrased it as less engaging.
Yes. So we're lucky to have a very diverse practice, and it was by design. We've over the years thought that that's the best way of developing our lawyers, to give them a rounded experience, but also to make our day-to-day interesting, because there's a lot of magic in diversity when it comes to the work that you do. It adds a lot to your learning, but also just makes your day more interesting when you're doing different things. And so each of the areas we work in, I genuinely enjoy, but I can give you examples of areas, of types of cases that I really enjoy. We do some really involved work with our clients around reform. So it might be reforming a particular legislative scheme. So we'd give them a lot of advice on how they can reform it, what are the issues with it, and how to develop some solutions, and then helping with the way they would craft those solutions and then how they implement them and so on. And I find that really rewarding because it's very deep engagement with policy and very close relationship with the client team working on those projects, and I get a lot out of that. At the other end of the spectrum, probably I had to think really hard about this, but I think where I landed was that I enjoy cost disputes the least, really? And that is when at the end of litigation, sometimes you have a dispute over costs. And it just comes down to haggling over dollars, and I find no intellectual fulfillment in that. So I think that's my least favorite.
No, I can understand that.
It's not glamorous.
Likewise.
Luckily, we don't do much of that, so that's good.
Good to hear. How about you, Kath?
Probably obvious from everything I've said by now, I really love litigation. In particular, I do a lot of our urgent injunction work, so they're matters brought to the court urgently seeking to restrain government from taking certain action. Maybe there's something a little wrong with me, but I just love that. I really love the high pressure environment that gets U2, I really enjoy working so closely with our clients in those moments, and I just find it really rewarding to be able to put something together really quickly, efficiently, think strategically, solve a lot of problems in a small period. I think that's because the work I find not least engaging in terms of subject matter, but probably most difficult is just sometimes the advisory work we do, because it's really kind of like doing a university project. It's really academic, very involved, and you can spend 2 weeks thinking about a really complex question. And there's not the same time pressure, which just for me as an individual is like being back at university. It's not my best state. I tend to procrastinate. So I really enjoy litigation. I really love advocacy. And so I tend to be really switched on when I'm doing that.
Well, it's good to hear that there's a bit of a balance of tasks for people who do enjoy that high-pressure environment, and then those who enjoy maybe taking a bit more time to have a think about things. I'm sure there's people on both sides of the spectrum. So,
and like Cohen said, both things are really important
of
as
course.
a lawyer. So I do both of them, and I know I need to, but I do tend to enjoy other things a bit more.
In terms of that, I guess what do you guys consider to be both a professional and personal highlight from, joining Sparke Helmore since your time at Sparke Helmore?
I'm really glad you asked professional and personal, because I think I do have very different highlights if you're talking about my personal career or my personal professional career as opposed to personally. In terms of that more personal thing, the highlight for me as I've developed and become a much more senior lawyer is it's almost like a daily thing in our team though, is mentoring and training. It is such a joy and such a highlight to help people go to their first final hearing and make submissions before a judge, or even just help them with a really complex legal question and see them just so relieved and thrilled when they get that advice over the line. And I just find that it's such a rewarding part of my job and a daily highlight that I'm lucky to have. So that, more personal side of things. Professionally, what working in government and public law, I think something quite unique about it is, given the nature of the work we do and the federal nature of it, is that you can be involved in some very complex and high profile litigation. And the first time I got to instruct in the High Court, and my first full bench of the High Court, which certainly happened in my career much sooner than my peers from university. It was just so rewarding and thrilling to kind of be at the Olympics of law, and people kind of talk it up. When you start as a lawyer, you think, maybe one day I'll go to the High Court, but when you do actually get there, it's so rewarding. And the cherry on the cake is if you get to win your High Court matter. Which
did you win that one?
I did.
Oh, glad to hear it.
So it is so rewarding to work on things like that and to get the outcomes for your client. Everyone feels really good. It's very, very fulfilling.
That sounds incredibly exciting. And what about you, Karwan?
Look, this is really hard, and it's hard to respond to it in a way that is both genuine but also not cliche. I'm going to fail at it, of course. But I would say this. I mean, we have had, over the last 10 years that I've been at Sparks, more than 10 years now, we've continued to grow the team in a consistent and fairly significant way. And what that's meant is being able to bring through a large number of lawyers, from sort of being junior lawyers all the way up to partner. And every time one of our team members achieves that milestone, I get an immense amount of joy out of it. And that is a highlight both for me and for the team. And so we very recently promoted our third partner into the team, Alana Lucchese, who's based in Canberra, and that was an absolute highlight of the recent times for me. And so each time that's happened with people at various stages, it's a wonderful feeling. And also something that benefits us as a team immensely every time that happens. So that'll be mine.
So speaking a bit more generally about, the public and government regulatory area, have there been any industry trends or noticeable developments that you have seen in your recent practice that you think our listeners might find engaging, whether they know about the area or are learning about it, want to know sort of what's going on in the current space? If there's anything you have about that.
I'll give my higher level answer, but this is definitely Karwan's expertise, an answer on a question like this. With court litigation, it's a constant evolution, so there's constantly updates. The federal courts have a fairly significant caseload, some would say backlog, of in particular migration law proceedings, which we do a lot of work in, and there's a lot of work being done kind of like as a policy drive from the courts to run those matters in the most efficient way possible. I'm sure it's not unique to that area, but there's so much thought going into how these matters are run, how best to minimise costs and time for the parties, and it's really exciting, and it's something we've got to keep on top of constantly. So there's also been massive judicial appointments, influx of judges, and there's a lot going on in the courts that's really interesting. And so that also means there's plenty of judgments. If you want to know what public law is, plenty of judgments coming out that you can read any day of the week. There's a lot happening, and it's really exciting.
Okay, well, I'll defer to Karwan then to give us an answer as well.
Look, the trend of the era across the board, including government and our space, is technology and AI. And that is filtering through to government and to the way government operates and also the way we operate. And so questions around automating processes and decision making, the use of technology and issues around security and privacy and impact on people's individual rights and so on are all issues that are increasingly having to be grappled with, and we are getting an increasing amount of work in that space that I find very enjoyable, but also it's going to continue to be an area of focus for government, and a very challenging one, I think, for everyone concerned. I'm pretty positive about that technology and what's happening, but it will be difficult nonetheless and exciting.
Yeah, for sure. I think AI is one of those buzzwords, especially with like uni students. There's a bit of anxiety and kind of anticipation of what that looks like. So that's a really good point as well. And I'm sure it'll affect the space. Kind of leading on from that as well, in terms of for students who are kind of interested in pursuing this practice area, Karwan, I know you mentioned that kind of admin law and the subject matter is always a good indication of whether someone's well equipped for that area, but not necessarily a massive determinant as well. What kind of pathways would be available for someone to explore a career in the government and regulatory space as a uni student?
Yeah, look, it's a great question, and I wish I knew that when I was a law student. I worked in a furniture shop when I was a law student. It did not just home furniture, so it's sort of, and I used to also deliver it, which was a highlight always, a trip out from the shop. But there are a number of different pathways nowadays, and I think students generally are pretty good at exploring them. One pathway that's worked really well for us and our people is we have a fairly large paralegal team at Sparke Helmore in our government practice, because we sort of to support the litigation work. And that's been a really successful way of people coming in and getting a flavor of the work that we do. And then we have a number of fairly senior lawyers now who started with us as paralegals, and they then stayed with us as grads and then have continued on. And so that's a really nice and I think often underrated pathway in terms of getting exposure to private practice when you're a student and sort of getting ready for it. The other one I know Kath and I talked about earlier, and we've again had a number of people coming through in this way, is associateships. So being a tribunal member's associate in the Administrative Review Tribunal, or being a judge's associate in any of the federal courts, is another really good way of getting exposure to this area of work and building those, that knowledge base. Those are just two of the ways in which you could do that, but there have been two particularly significant pathways for people coming into our team.
Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I would just say the paralegal pathway is mine. I did work in a cafe most of the way through university, and it was only when I finished up that I spent a month or so paralegaling in a administrative law team at another firm. And had I not done that, I don't think I would have ended up doing my first graduate rotation in their team and ultimately begging them to never let me leave. So it is, what the exposure you do get as a paralegal is pretty incredible, and you do get to see what's going on and be a massive part of it. And that I would hope is a successful, I was a
Yeah.
successful pathway person through that one, and it's really rewarding.
It also just teaches you skills about private practice, leaving aside the subject area, because you're in a law firm environment, obviously, and having to operate within it. So it's a great pathway.
Well, Kath, as someone who started as a paralegal, and you mentioned earlier how rewarding you find the experience of mentoring now those that are paralegals or under you. When you are mentoring students that, you know, are building up their experience or interest in the space, what do you tell them to focus on or direct them to develop in those early stages?
I think something we discussed was that actual exposure. So we were talking about, you know, finding a genuine academic interest in public law, but, you know, practically, how do you do that? It might sound super cliche, but actually reading High Court judgments, I have to confess, it's not necessarily something I did at university. I am certain that if I'd done it, I would have been even more in love with public law than I am now. But actually, you know, a lot of what we do, given the public-facing nature of it, is in the newspaper. Seeing that, reading that, newspaper online in the news, but actually seeing that and then going and reading the judgment, you know, as a law student. I wish I'd just read way more judgments at university. There's also so many resources and seminars and things happening all the time in the public law space, and especially at, you know, universities like UNSW, Sydney Uni, they're always things I'm signing up for ambitiously to try and get to at 5 p.m. after work. There's so much you can go to and hear, you know, you can hear the Chief Justice speak. It's free, everyone, you know, it's a public event. And if you're actually interested in federal jurisdiction and federal law and the High Court and what's going on, there's plenty of events you can attend and just hear those people speak. It's always so impressive, and so just get out there and engage with it.
Karwan, you've also done your fair share of mentoring. Is there anything you have to add to that?
No, look, I think exposure is critical, and it is the most important way of getting that familiarity. What I did very early on in my career and from uni and then beyond was just expose myself to different practice areas and different types of working. I did internships at NGOs and IGOs and so on, and then sort of tried a summer clerkship and a couple of different practice areas. And that exposure is what solidified in my mind exactly what I wanted to do, but also gave me that sort of basic skill set to be able to succeed once you really start your career in earnest. So I think there's no substitute for that, and it's critical.
Yeah, that's, I think, really great advice, just saying yes to everything and not really knowing as a law student where you're going to end up and what you might find interesting as well. So I think that's really kind of poignant advice as well. Kind of in that similar vein, taking yourself back to maybe our shoes, is there any advice you received or wish you had received during your time in university that you wish you kind of followed? Like, I know if I was listening to your TED Talk on perspective, I probably would have followed that one as well. So is there any advice that you guys had or wish you had received?
I think there's probably two stages at which I listened to people better. The first is kind of in my penultimate and final years of university. People tell you, and it's really hard to believe because you're quite stressed about getting into the workforce, but that it will work out. You might not necessarily go through a traditional, what they call traditional pathways like graduate programs, but there's plenty out there. The associateships, I would have loved to know about one of those when I was in university, but genuinely believing that things will be okay. I think at that point, then when I started working, I wish I had listened to people telling me to go home when I didn't have anything to do. And it sounds insane, but if you get to 5 or 6 p.m. and you're genuinely done and the next thing on your list is not urgent, it's also the only other thing you have to do, packing up, you can do it tomorrow. I really wish I'd listened to those people, and I try my best when I'm heading home to say to our junior lawyers, do you need to do that tonight? I really wish I'd listened to that.
I think that's a wonderful thing to pass down to your team as well. Hopefully they listen.
They do. They could.
I would say I wish someone had just sat me down and said, take it easy, it's a long game. Because I think there's a tendency when you start, and I know when I started, you're in a hurry and you're trying to prove yourself, you're trying to make it happen. But sometimes that means you're not really having as much fun as you could be having. And you've already got the pressure of, it's just overwhelming when you come into this space, and generally not enjoying it is, I think, a pretty common experience. And it's a shame because it flies by. Before you know it, you're a senior lawyer. Before you know it, you've got kids and mortgages and, people to manage and all of that. And then you start enjoying life and you're like, yeah, it's nice. But, I wish I had started enjoying when I was a one-year lawyer. And I think, yeah, that would be mine.
In a very similar vein, then, if you were to take yourself back to your very first week as a graduate, what is something that you would reassure yourself about?
That it is totally fine and thrilling to take your annual leave. I think my first year as a lawyer, I thought maybe I shouldn't go on a holiday and maybe I should, get really stuck in. No, I wish I'd gone on a holiday that year. It would have been really good for me. Maybe your generation's slightly better at that than I was, but I just wish I'd not been so rigid about my view on what being a lawyer was and what private practice was, because I think my perspective was a bit misguided and a bit old-fashioned. And law firms are, moving with the times. I just got back from 2 weeks overseas. It's so important and so healthy to take even just a day off here and there. And I just really wish I'd started taking leave sooner. It sounds silly because why wouldn't you? But I think when you're young and starting out work, especially, lawyers tend to be a certain type of person who want to prove themselves, like Karwan said, in a hurry to prove themselves. I just wish I'd also understood that it's also really impressive to manage yourself and take leave and monitor, for burnout and all those kind of things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so true. For me, it would be just being reassured that private practice is for me. Because it actually, when I came into private practice, I was offered a grad position and I only took it because someone told me it will give you good training. But I never thought that I would actually enjoy private practice. And I gave up another opportunity in the with an international organization that was going to be very different as a career pathway. And in those early weeks and months, I kept thinking, did I do the right thing? And looking back, it's the best thing I've done. I absolutely love private practice and I wouldn't do anything else. And so it would have been nice to know that back then. Maybe I would have enjoyed myself a bit more had I known that.
Yeah, that's really great advice. I think just taking it as a marathon rather than a sprint. I think law students are so focused on getting to the next step and where they want to end up that sometimes you just got to enjoy the journey as well and kind of make the most of your opportunities. But yeah, no, thank you so much for meeting with us today and chatting about your work in government, public and regulatory. I for sure learned a lot. I'm sure our viewers will learn a lot as well in terms of kind of the work you guys do and dispelling a lot of the myths, I guess, around private practice and law as well. So thank you so much for taking out the time out of your schedules to chat with us today.
Absolute pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
Likewise. We've really enjoyed getting to know both your practice area and more about you guys as people and offering some advice for our listeners who are definitely interested in what practice is like and what this area is like as well. So thank you for listening to Insights by the UNSW Law Society. If you enjoyed this and would like to listen to more episodes, please make sure you subscribe to our podcast.